I moved to South Dakota about 5 years ago. It was the first time I had ever lived alone, but it didn't begin out of choice. It began out of exhaustion. For years, my parents had been telling me the same things over and over again, that I was a burden, that I was too old to still be living at home, that my presence annoyed them. Every conversation ended the same way. They told me I needed to leave, to take care of myself, to disappear from their living space. Not with concern, but with cold, impatient voices, as if I were a mistake they were trying to correct. No one asked what I wanted. I was simply informed that I was no longer welcome. I didn't leave after a loud argument. I left in a silence so heavy it felt suffocating. There were no good luck wishes, no advice. Just the sense that everything had been decided long ago, and that my departure was simply the final step in making them feel lighter. When I drove away, no one watched me go. No one asked how I would live or how I would manage. That's when I realized I hadn't been kicked out in a single day. I had been pushed out, little by little, over many years. South Dakota wasn't a place I dreamed of, but it was far enough that no one could reach out and pull me back, and cold enough that I didn't have to pretend I was okay. I chose a remote place not because I loved being alone, but because I was used to it. There, if no one cared about me, at least no one pretended to. For a long time, that silence was the only thing that made me feel safe. The house I found sat in one of the snowiest parts of the state, deep in an area where the nearest home was a long walk away. It suited me perfectly, and for the most part, it stayed that way. The first few years passed quietly, in the best way possible. I kept to myself, went to work, came home, and didn't bother anyone. I never introduced myself to my neighbors, partly because I wasn't that kind of person, and partly because there was no real reason to. The houses were so far apart that you could go weeks without seeing another person. Everything changed one afternoon in early February. I was at work when the snow started falling. At first, there was nothing unusual about it, but within an hour, everything shifted. The wind picked up. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. The roads became dangerous. Eventually, my boss told everyone to head home before conditions got worse. I drove a lifted pickup truck, so I wasn't too worried about getting back. I had driven through bad weather plenty of times before, and the truck always handled it well. Still, there were a few stretches of road that made me uneasy. When I finally turned onto the driveway leading to my house, I felt nothing but relief. But when I tried to open the front door, I realized it was completely frozen shut. I stood there for a moment, trying to understand what was happening, then tried again. The door wouldn't budge. I didn't have a lighter or anything that could produce enough heat to melt the ice in the lock. I tried breathing on it, cupping my hands, even pounding on the door in frustration. Nothing worked. I went back to my truck and sat there, unsure of what to do. The heater was blasting, and I told myself I would wait out the storm. Maybe in an hour or two, the snow would calm down, and I could figure something else out. But as I sat there watching through the windshield, I saw the snow falling harder. About 10 minutes later, I realized I was making a mistake. The longer I waited, the worse things would get. My truck was already nearly half buried in snow, and even with the lift, I didn't trust that I'd be able to drive back out of the driveway. Driving was no longer an option. I had no one to call. I didn't know my neighbors, and my parents were hours away. I tried backing the truck out anyway, but just as I expected, it was stuck. My only choice was to walk to one of the nearby houses and ask for help. I hated the idea of showing up at a stranger's door and asking to stay the night, but I had no other option. Staying in the truck all night wasn't possible. Eventually, the gas would run out, and I'd be trapped in a cold metal box in the middle of a snowstorm. The nearest house was still quite far, about a quarter mile. By the time I reached it, I was shaking uncontrollably. It was a small, single-story house, and even through the blinding snow, I could tell it was run down. I knocked hard. I waited about a minute, and just as I was about to turn away and try another house, the door suddenly flew open so forcefully that I had to step back. The man standing in front of me looked to be around 50 years old. His face was completely ordinary, nothing memorable about it. He stared at me for a few seconds without speaking, then introduced himself as Joe. I explained my situation, my teeth chattering from the cold. He didn't respond right away. He just nodded very slowly, his expression unchanged, then stepped aside and opened the door wider for me to come in. I should have felt relieved. But the moment I crossed the threshold, I felt something was wrong. Not because of anything he said or did, just a feeling. Something vague but heavy, like I had stepped into a place I didn't belong. The house was warm. The heat wrapped around me instantly, and for a moment, it dulled my instincts. Right then, warming up was all I cared about. He gestured for me to sit on the sofa and took a seat across from me in a worn-out armchair, the cushions sunken in from years of use. We started making small talk, at least I tried to. He answered my questions, but his eyes never stayed still. They wandered constantly around the room, from me, to the floor, to the ceiling, then past my shoulder, as if something were standing there. I noticed he couldn't focus on anything for more than a few seconds. At first, I told myself he was probably just tense about having a stranger in his home. That made sense. But the longer I sat there, the stronger the unease became, slow, steady, unavoidable. He kept interrupting himself. Mid-sentence, he would suddenly stop speaking, his eyes locking onto a spot on the wall, completely motionless. The way he stared didn't look like thinking. It looked like he was staring through the wall. I started giving shorter answers, avoiding eye contact, with one thought repeating in my mind. I shouldn't stay here long. I said I was exhausted and asked if I could sleep for a bit. The moment I said it, he let out a very soft breath, as if a weight had just been lifted. He pointed to the sofa and told me I could sleep there for the night. I asked if I could turn off the light. He switched off the table lamp immediately, without hesitation, but he didn't leave. He stood there, in the doorway, not speaking, not moving. The silence stretched so long that I started to feel short of breath. I didn't dare turn my head. I could only feel his presence in the darkness. Eventually, so slowly I couldn't tell if it was seconds or minutes, he turned and walked down the hallway toward what I assumed was his bedroom. I tried to sleep. I was exhausted, and the sofa was more comfortable than I expected. But every time my eyes closed, my heart pounded harder, like some part of me knew I wasn't safe. I kept jolting awake, convinced I had heard something. About an hour later, I no longer had to imagine it. Heavy, dull thuds echoed directly above me. Then came the sound of scraping, slow and deliberate. It took me a moment to realize the sound was coming from the ceiling. At first, I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just snow sliding off the roof, something that happens during big storms. But these sounds were different. They had rhythm, pauses, and that didn't make sense. The house only had one floor. There was no upstairs. No one should have been up there. I lay completely still, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, trying to find a rational explanation before fear consumed me. The sounds continued for several minutes, not constant, but persistent, like something was moving, stopping, then moving again. And then, without warning, a loud crash erupted, powerful enough to make me jump upright from the sofa. My heart nearly burst from my chest, and the moment I sat up, I saw him. Joe was standing in the doorway. He stood there in the darkness, completely silent. I hadn't heard him return, which meant he had already been standing there watching me. My skin crawled. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but before I could make a sound, he lunged at me. He vaulted over the back of the sofa and slammed me to the floor. The next moments were chaos. We rolled across the carpet, and in the panic, I felt his hands clamp around my throat. He was far stronger than he looked. In that moment, a cold thought crossed my mind. I'm going to die here. I fought desperately, my lungs burning for air, and then he started screaming. He yelled at me to stop resisting. His voice broke and twisted, no longer sounding human. He kept talking about her, again and again, as if I should know who he meant, as if my presence here was meant for her. He said she was lonely, that she would see me as good company. I didn't think about any of that. I was fighting to survive. Somehow, I managed to shove him away. I scrambled to my feet, grabbed my jacket, and ran for the front door. I didn't even put the jacket on. I was too scared to waste another second. Behind me, I heard him shouting something insane. "I'm fairly certain," he said, "she won't be happy," or something like that. I ran and didn't stop until I reached the next house. The people who opened the door were normal. A couple. They took one look at me and pulled me inside without asking questions. I slept on their sofa that night. The next morning, I woke up to the wife Kathy making coffee. The three of us sat at the kitchen table, and I told them what had happened. As soon as I described the house, the husband Brandon interrupted me. He asked if it was Joe. I said yes. He just nodded, as if it didn't surprise him at all. He told me Joe had been a problem in the area for years, then told me something that made my skin crawl all over again. About a decade earlier, Joe's wife had disappeared. There was never an official investigation. Nothing was proven, but most people in the area believed he had killed her. Her body was never found. Everything clicked into place. For some reason, I stayed quiet. I still don't understand why. I did report my experience to the police, but I don't think anything ever came of it. The scariest part is that I continued living in that house for another 3 years. Nothing ever happened again after that snowstorm night, but I'd be lying if I said I don't feel uneasy every time I drive past Joe's house. The only bright spot is that I became close with the family who took me in that night. Still, every time I visit their home, I feel something strange because it reminds me of Joe and of the horrible thing he may have done to his wife. This happened last winter, during one of the worst snowstorms I can remember. I was 28, living alone in a small rented house in upstate New York. I work remotely in finance, which sounds fancier than it really is. Most days, I sit at my desk and stare at spreadsheets. I mean, I rarely have a reason to leave the house on weekdays. Some weeks, I don't go outside at all. Anyway, the local news had been hyping this blizzard for days. You know how they are. Every storm is potentially historic or life-threatening until it drops 3 inches and everyone forgets about it. But this time, it actually looked serious. The weather alerts told people to stay off the roads unless it was absolutely necessary, stock up on essentials, that kind of thing. So that morning, I went out for groceries, grabbed enough food to make it through the weekend, then stayed inside and worked from home, thinking the next few days would just be boring. The snow started falling in the middle of the afternoon, and by around 8 p.m., I could barely see past my front porch. I spent most of the evening on the couch, half watching TV, listening to the wind howl outside. It's a very specific sound wind in a blizzard, not like a summer storm that comes and goes. This was constant, like the whole house was inside a tunnel. Around 10:30, I heard a new sound, a loud thump, then dragging, like something heavy being pulled across wood. I figured a branch had snapped and fallen. There are a few old oak trees near my driveway, and with snow and wind like that, branches falling isn't unusual. But about 15 minutes later, I heard a car horn, not a normal honk. It was weak and broken up, almost like someone had brushed the horn by accident. I went to the front window and looked out. There was a car stopped near the end of my driveway. I could see its headlights cutting through the snow, but that was it. I stood there for a few minutes, waiting to see if someone got out, but I couldn't make out any movement. With a storm like that, I couldn't even tell what kind of car it was. My first thought was that someone had slid off the road. That happens out there, especially in weather like this. This might sound cold, but I wasn't going to wait outside in a blizzard to check on a stranger. Not when I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. I went back to the couch and tried to focus on something else. Around 11 p.m., I heard knocking at the front door. I didn't open it. Instead, I went closer and called out, asking who it was. A man's voice answered. He said his car was stuck, and he needed to come inside to warm up and use a phone. His voice sounded strained, like he was out of breath. Part of me felt guilty. If he really had walked through that storm, he had to be freezing. But another part of me still wasn't ready to open my door to a stranger in the middle of the night. So instead of opening it fully, I cracked it, making sure the safety chain was still latched. The man on the porch was covered in snow so much it was almost ridiculous. Snow clumped on his coat, his shoulders, his hair. He was shorter than me, and he was visibly shaking. He said his phone was dead, and he'd been walking for a while, looking for a house with lights on. I was just about to unchain the door when I noticed his boots. I don't know why I looked down, but I did, and that's the problem. His boots were clean and dry. If he had really been walking through a blizzard for a while, his boots should have been packed with snow and ice like everything else. Hell, my own boots looked like that just from walking from my door to my truck. A cold weight dropped in my stomach, nothing to do with the weather. I told him again that I would call for help and make sure someone came to pick him up. He asked to come inside again, more forcefully this time. I didn't answer. I just shut the door and locked it. I heard him say something on the other side, but I had already gone to get my phone. I called 911 and explained what was happening. While I was still talking to dispatch, I heard footsteps leaving the porch and moving along the side of my house toward the back. The dispatcher told me to stay inside and lock all my doors. She said police were on the way, but warned the response time might be delayed because of the weather. I went to a side window and peeked out, careful not to let him see me. The man was standing near the corner of my house, about 15 feet away. He wasn't moving, just standing there, looking up at the windows. A few minutes later, I heard heavy banging on the back door like someone was trying to break it in. The whole door shook in its frame. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and backed into my bedroom. I locked the bedroom door behind me and stood a few feet from it. The banging stopped after about a minute. I don't know how long I stood there. It felt like hours, but it was probably only 20 minutes. At some point, I heard the car horn again exactly like before, but this time it was one long, continuous blast. Thankfully, the police arrived right after that. They found a car partially buried in a snowbank by the road, but it was farther than where I'd seen the headlights. When they checked it, the engine was cold, not warm like it had been running recently. And here's the part that still makes my skin crawl. The officers told me there were no footprints leading from the car to my house. The snow between the car and my property was completely undisturbed. There were footprints coming down my driveway and circling around my house, but they stopped right at the end of the driveway, as if someone had arrived in another vehicle. Police searched the area, but they didn't find anyone. The next morning, after the storm passed and the sun was out, I went outside to look around. That's when I panicked. There were muddy handprints on the outside of my bedroom window, and they definitely weren't there when the police checked the property the night before, as if the person came back after they left, or had been hiding somewhere and never left in the first place. A few days later, I heard that another house, about half a mile from mine, had been broken into while the storm still hadn't fully cleared. The homeowners weren't there, so no one was hurt. But what chilled me was, nothing was taken. No belongings, no money, no sign of a burglary. That feeling came back immediately. The feeling that the intruder didn't go into that house to steal something but to look for something or someone. And I couldn't stop thinking that if I had opened the door that night, maybe I would have been the next target. Or worse, maybe I was the only person who had a chance to stop something horrible from happening. I know it sounds stupid, But the more I thought about it, the more a heavy regret latched onto me. I'm grateful I didn't open the door. But at the same time, I hate myself for it. Because my choice may have protected me, but it also may have put someone else in danger. I don't know who that person was. I don't know what he really wanted to do. And maybe the scariest part is this: I'll never know. This happened years ago. I've only told 3 people: my wife, my brother, and a close friend, the kind of people I trust not to think I'm paranoid. I'm sharing it here, not to get sympathy, but because I still live with a question that never got an answer. That on that blizzard night, did I do the right thing? Or did I simply choose safety for myself and turn my back on something I should have faced? And now, I accept that I may have to carry that feeling for the rest of my life. Not fear, but regret.